This video was sponsored by Blinkist, but I'll tell you more about them in a little bit.
It wasn't magic. I was back there and I was doing that with my hand. Hey, welcome to another video where I'm gonna show you how I made these sweet tambour side tables. See? Tambour. Slides around a corner. Pretty nifty. This is a pretty crazy project, so we're gonna get into this. But there are plans available for these side tables. There's a link in my video description to these plans, as well as all the plans on my website and other merchandise like t-shirts, motivational posters, a link to my Patreon page if you want to support the channel in that way, and a whole bunch of other stuff. So make sure to check that out. So yeah, let's build some side tables.
Alright, buckle up folks, because we've got a long ways to go and a short road to get there. We've got so much to cover in this. It's going to be quick. It might not make sense at times, but I promise if you stick with me until the end, it'll all come together. First thing I had to do was start milling down some white oak to make the tops and bottoms for my side tables. So I cut them to length, I ran them through the joiner, and then I cut them to width over on the table saw. Now my original plan was to glue up one big chunk and then chop 4 pieces out of this, but I didn't like how wobbly and uneven the boards were. So I decided since I gotta cut them into 4 pieces anyways, I might as well cut them down short and then glue up 4 separate pieces. So I took them over to the chop saw, chopped them down, and then I was able to face joint them to get them nice and square. After face joining them, I ran them through the planer to bring them down to exactly 1 inch thick. Then I took all of my planed and milled pieces that were now square and wobble free, as you can see me beautifully demonstrate here as I lay them out before you. Then I started clamping them up. Now these are small enough and they're milled so well that I didn't need any biscuits or Dominoes. I just slapped some glue on there and I licked the glue off my fingers apparently because I'm an animal, and I clamped them together. Now whenever I put clamps on one side of a board like this, I like to take an extra clamp and actually clamp the board to the clamp. This just prevents you from getting a nice bow in the middle and keeps everything nice and flat. After doing that, I wiped down all the excess glue, and I did the exact same thing to the remaining 3 panels until they were all glued up. While I waited for that glue to dry, it was time to start working on my base. Now this is not to be confused with my bottom. I was working on my tops and bottoms, and now I'm working on the base that those tops and bottoms will sit on top of. Like I said, this might be confusing, but it will all come together in the end. After milling down some pieces for my base, I took them over to the miter saw and I cut them at 15 degrees on each end. These are going to be the long stretchers on the front and back of my base. After cutting one side at 15 degrees, I set up a stop block so that I could make repeatable cuts at the exact same length for my remaining 3 pieces. And then I cut them all. Zip, zoop, zop, zoop, just like that. And I had 4 stretcher pieces. Next, I needed to cut 4 identical legs. Now these were also going to be cut at 15 degrees on either end. And in order to make these repeatable with such small pieces, I made this nice little sled that I could set them inside and push the sled up against my stop block thingamabob. And then I cut a 15-degree angle just on one end because these are actually offcuts of my other pieces, so it already had a 15-degree angle on the other end. And as you can see, these will be the legs on either side of my base for the front and the back. After laying those against my stretcher, I marked out for the domino joiner. That's right, people. Leave your hate-filled comments down below. Yes, I'm using a domino joiner, but you don't have to. Get a doweling jig, do the exact same thing, no big deal. Then I took all those pieces and I ran them through the table saw, leaving a little groove a ½ inch down from the top. This will come in handy later when we go to attach the base to the actual cabinet side table thingamabob using Z-clip fasteners, but we'll get to that later. Then I cut some other stock pieces with that same groove and I ran them through the table saw, giving them a 15-degree bevel on the top so that they'll match the 15-degree splay on the base. It'll make sense, I promise, just wait. Then I took those stock pieces back over to the miter saw and I cut 4 uniform pieces. This will give me the width of my base. As you can see here, sped up for your viewing pleasure of exactly what that base will look like. Well, I guess really it just looks like an upside down base right now. As you can see, I've got this groove all the way around that my Z fasteners will fit into. If you don't know what those are, just wait till I get to that point. I'll show you what they are. Next, I marked for my dominoes on those connecting stretcher things. Now, whenever I'm dominoing little pieces like this, I find that it's easier to actually hold the piece onto the domino joiner rather than holding the domino joiner onto the piece. So I start with all my little legs first, and I mortise them out to get the dominoes. Then using my patented hip thrust technique, there it is again, there it is again. Anyways, this is the best way I found to use the domino joiner because you can put both hands on the joiner and thrust with your hips. Don't hate me, it works. See? Over and over and over again until all of my pieces are mortised out and ready for dominoes. Speaking of dominoes, there they are. So, with my dominoes and a bottle of glue, I just start slapping everything together. I found that the best way to clamp up these legs was to do them in sections of 4. First I did the front and the back, and then after the glue dried there, I'll hook them in with the connecting stretcher pieces. I also glued a few little cauls with some tape and CA glue onto the outside so that my clamps wouldn't slip off. Then the next day I came out, did a little dance, and removed the clamps. But you don't need to see that whole process. Alright, maybe just one more little dance. And remove the clamps. Then I wanted to give the base just a little more flair, pizzazz, panache, pistachio, whatever you want to call it. So I took it over to the chop saw and I cut another angle on the outside, mimicking the angle on the inside. Then it was back over to the dominoes and the bottle of glue, and I hooked the entire base together. And it looked like this. The base is done, just needs to be sanded. Time to get back over to our tops and bottoms. So after taking them out of clamps, I had to figure out a way to take this square and make it less square. I wanted to give each corner a nice radiused profile. I found this roll of tape and I traced a line and I thought, hey, yeah, that looks exactly like I want it to. The only problem is I can't use a roll of tape to cut that. So I had to come up with another solution. So this is what I did. I took my stock piece over to the table saw and I used it to measure the width. Then I cut a piece of plywood exactly that width and length of my stock piece of oak. Then I took my plywood back over to my workbench. Like I mentioned, I can't use this roll of tape. It just isn't going to do the job. So I found this piece of plexiglass that goes on the bottom of my router that is almost exactly the same size. It's a 4-inch circle to be exact. And handy enough, it's already got these holes in it that I could send some screws through and hook it down temporarily to that piece of plywood. Now I've got myself a perfect router template that I could use over on my router table with a top bearing mounted upcut, downcut flush bit that I got from Bits and Bits. Their bits are awesome, by the way. Once I did one corner, it was as simple as moving it around to the remaining 3 corners until I had a perfectly templated out radiused template. Yes, I did just use a template to make myself a template. but you gotta do what you gotta do. I know lots of people get their templates cut on CNCs, but I don't have a CNC, so this is how we do it in my neck of the woods. Then, because you're not actually gonna see the interior portion of the base or the top, instead of trying to hook it down with double-sided tape, I just countersunk some screws right through the plywood into the oak stock below. Now I had a wonderful template that I could use to get that nice rounded radius profile on all 4 of my pieces, my 2 tops and my 2 bottoms. And in no time, they were looking clean and smooth and ready to groove. I just made that up. Then before I removed the template, I marked one side as the front, and I marked the stock with a front marking as well. This is going to come in super handy in just a little bit when we need to reapply this template to the top. Just trust me, I have a plan. So I got busy templating out my remaining pieces until, like I mentioned, I had 4 identical pieces that were perfectly rounded on all 4 corners. With that done, the next thing I had to do was create a groove just inside the perimeter of each piece. Now this groove is what is going to contain our tambour and make a track for it to slide in. So I took my template, the same one I used to radius all those corners, and I trimmed exactly 1 inch off of each size. Essentially, I shrunk the entire thing in 1 inch total on each side. And because I started with a 4-inch circle and I was coming in 1 inch on each side, I had to get a 2-inch circle to radius my new corners. You'd think it'd be a 1-inch circle, but it's a circle, so you got to come in 1 inch on each side. So 4 inches minus 2 inches, you wind up with a 2-inch circle. Anyways, then I did the exact same thing I did before with the plexiglass template. I just screwed this little wooden circle template onto each corner, and I went back over to the router table and I just kept switching it from corner to corner until I had each corner perfectly radiused with a 2-inch round corner. Now here's where marking it with that front and front works out really well. All I had to do was line up my original screw holes, and now I know that that template is perfectly centered in the middle of my stock piece of oak, because it was perfectly centered to begin with, and I just put it back where it was. Now to cut my groove, I attached this giant plexiglass base to my router so that it'd be nice and sturdy. I also attached a 3/8 inch bushing that I got at rockler.com and a 3/8 inch spiral upcut bit. My plan was to do 3 passes, going down 1/8 of an inch each time. So I got 1/8 of an inch, 1/4 of an inch, and a 3/8 inch setup block, and this is how I measured my depth on each pass. I'd push the router all the way down until the blade came in contact with the oak below. Then I would insert an 1/8 inch setup block in between my stop there and lock it in place. Now I know when I plunge, it'll make up that difference and plunge exactly 1/8 of an inch. Then I just have to do the same thing each time I lower it, switching to the 1/4 inch and then the 3/8 inch until I plunge my full 3/8 inch depth all the way into that oak stock. Now the key here is to go slow and make sure you're maintaining constant pressure with that bushing against your plywood template. I found the best way to do it was to do a half circle around the template, flip it around, and then continue my pass until I connected. Then I'd take a new setup block, insert it in there, reset my depth, and do another pass going down another 1/8 of an inch. You don't want to do the full 3/8 all at once. That's when the router is going to get away from you and it's not going to look pretty. But this looks pretty. The template worked perfect and we had a nice 3/8 by 3/8 inch groove around the entire piece. Then I just had to repeat it on the remaining 3 and we were well on our way. This video was sponsored by Blinkist. Now, tell me, has this ever happened to you? You really want to read a book, but you just don't have the time, or it's just not convenient to do so because you're trying to do other things at the same time. I know I've had that problem. That's why I was thrilled that I recently discovered Blinkist. So instead of having to find the time to read a whole book, I can just listen to all its highlights in only 15 minutes. That's right, entire books compressed down to just 15 minutes. I can listen to them while I sand, I can listen to them while I saw, I can listen to them while I drill, I can even listen to them while I balance stuff on my face in my driveway. Literally anywhere, anytime. Blinkist takes the best insights from 3,000 plus nonfiction books and condenses them down into just 15 minutes. I mean, I just listened to a book on post-capitalism. Nobody's got time to actually read that. I also just listened to this book about listening, and it was pretty darn good. And here's the awesome part. The first 100 people to go to Blinkist.com/bourbonmothwoodworking are going to get unlimited access for 1 week to try it out. You'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership. The 7-day trial is completely free, and you can cancel at any time during that period. So seriously, click the link in my video description, save yourself some time, save yourself some money, and more importantly, learn something awesome. Alright, with our base done, our tops done, our bottoms done, it was time to start working on the internal cabinet structure that will connect everything together, and also give a space for our tambour to float in. So I took some white oak plywood, I cut it down to the sizes I needed to make my cabinet box. I took my outside pieces and I ran them through the dado saw, a dado on each end and a dado in the middle, the exact width of my plywood, which is 3/4 of an inch. Then I put a 1/4 inch groove on the back of all of my pieces. That will allow my 1/4 inch back panel to land in. And speaking of 1/4 inch panels, I then cut down my 1/4 inch back panel to the correct size. Then before I actually start hooking these together, I had to prep the pieces a little bit so that we could connect this cabinet to our top and bottom pieces. So on the underside of the top piece of the cabinet, I countersunk some holes that we can send some screws through. Like I said, this is one of those confusing parts that will make sense in the end. Just stick with me. Then on the outside of my side pieces, at the bottom, I added a few pocket holes. I know, confusing. Just go with me on this. It's all gonna come full circle. After drilling my pocket holes and my countersunk holes for my screws, now we can start putting the whole thing together. So I added a little glue into those dado slots. I put on one side, I put on the other side, I stuck my middle piece in place, I slid in my back panel, and then, come on, get in there. And then I put on my final side. Then very carefully, I tipped the whole thing upright, not knowing that I was probably spilling glue all over the inside of my cabinet at the same time, and I added some clamps. I also added a few of these woodpecker clamping squares just to make sure everything was, well, square. Now, because you're not going to ever see the outside of these cabinets, I decided to just throw some countersunk screws to hold the top and bottom panels in place. That way I could immediately remove the clamps and not have to wait around for the glue to dry. Yeah, it might be ugly, but like I said, you're never going to see the outside of this cabinet. Hence the pocket holes on the side there. Then our cabinet box was done. Well, not really done. I mean, it's constructed, but we still have to make it look pretty. Now here's where you're going to get the first look at, well, what this looks like. See, the cabinet goes on top of the bottom, which goes on top of the base, and then the top piece goes on top of the cabinet. The track on the top faces down, and the track on the bottom faces up. That will be where our tambour rides, in that track. But before we get there, we have to actually finish these cabinet boxes, which means facing them with some solid white oak. I just ripped down some white oak to exactly 3/4 of an inch by 1/2 inch, and I glued it on using these Rockler bandy clamps. I don't use these a lot, but when I do have to face things like this, boy are they handy. Huh, they're bandy and they're handy. Maybe that's why they call them bandy clamps. They should call them the handy bandy clamps. Anyways, I'm getting off topic. After doing my sides and letting the glue dry, I did all my cross pieces until there was no more visible plywood and they were looking super clean. Then the last thing that we had to work on, and the most time-consuming thing by far, was the tambour itself. Now, tambour panels are a flexible panel made up of a ton of individual slats that are hooked together by a substrate of usually canvas, sometimes paper or leather, but in this case we'll be using canvas. The first step was to mill down a bunch of white oak until it was exactly 5/8 of an inch thick, and then rip down 500 billion strips at exactly 1 inch wide. It took a while. Then with all of our little pieces ripped down, I will be using these Rockler tambour bits. You do one on each side of a piece to make it look like this. Basically, you have a male side and a female side, and when you do multiple pieces, they can slide together in sweet, sweet matrimony. Just like that. So I set up the first bit over on my router table along with an unnatural amount of feather boards to hold it firmly down against the table and firmly against the fence, and I just started running them through. Using one piece after the other, I was able to use the next piece essentially as a push stick to push the first piece through, and I just started pushing pieces through. I even set up a little bucket on the end to catch all the pieces as they came out. And believe it or not, it really didn't take that long. After I did them on one side, I switched the bits and I did the opposite profile on the other side until finally all of my pieces were milled up and ready to go. Don't they look beautiful? I'll show you again how they nestle together like an old couple playing spoons in bed at midnight. That was a weird thing to say. Now, when I milled all these down, I purposely left them long so that I could cut them to the final length after they were all milled. The router kind of gnarled up the ends here or there, so I'd pick the nastiest end and I would chop it off. I did this for each slat, and there were about 166 of them, so yeah, it was kind of a tedious process. I won't show you every one. Then after I got them all cut to length, I took them over to the dado saw, and using a little sled, I cut a nice little 3/8 inch rabbet on the end of each piece. It was actually like a 1/16 over 3/8 so that it wouldn't rub as it went through that track. But yeah, I did that to every single slat until it looked just like this. It took a while, but not as long as it took to hand sand each individual slat. I tried to come up with a faster way to do this, but there just really wasn't one. I started one night and I didn't finish until the following morning. I did take a break to take a shower and change my clothes though, but after an ungodly amount of sanding, I was done. Good thing I hate sanding so much. Then with all of my pieces cut to length and rabbited out and hand sanded, it was finally time to start inserting them into the cabinet. Now, this is just a test fit. We still got to pull them back out and finish them and hook them together with canvas. I'm just more making sure I actually have enough pieces for, the coverage I need. So this is going to have a fixed panel on one side and then a moving panel on the other side. So there's going to be two separate glue ups of tambour. And then it's going to be open on the back so that when you slide the door open, it can move around and fill the gap on the back. Kind of like this. So even though they're not hooked together yet, it's still functioning the way it's kind of intended to. That's what I wanted to figure out. Now that I'm pretty sure it's going to work, it's time to pull them all back out. just when I got them in there. That's all woodworking is, putting things together, taking them apart, putting them together, taking them apart, until finally you're done. Next, after pulling them all out, I had to finish each slat before I glued them to the canvas. Because once they're glued to that canvas, there's just no way you're going to get finish in all the places you need to get finish. I should also mention that I'm only applying finish to one side. The back is unfinished so that our canvas will actually stick to it. After getting all those pieces finished, I sanded my cabinet boxes and all my other pieces, and I finished those as well. Now, before you ask, I'll just tell you I'm using Rubio Monocoat Cotton White to finish this, because it's white oak. Did you really think I was going to use anything else? Next, it was time to glue all my slats to the canvas backer. So I made this plywood jig that allowed me to lay out all the slats side by side, keeping them perfectly parallel, even, square, all that jazz. All I basically did was glue 2 rails on the outer side of the plywood and just slid the pieces in there, checking as I went to make sure that everything was staying nice and square. Then when I got to the length of tambour that I needed, I inserted a nice little piece of plywood as a stop, just to hold everything nice and secure while I glued the canvas down. As I mentioned, each little side table is going to have 2 tambour panels. There's going to be one that slides and one that is stationary. And I made this jig large enough that I could do both of those panels at the same time. So first I laid out my longer panel, and then I laid out my shorter stationary panel. Once I got enough pieces in, I put another plywood stop. Oh, golly, you gotta just be careful. The tambour, it pops up if you just gotta be really gentle. Easy does it. There. Oh, good gravy. Don't worry. I did manage to get it all laid out and tight in there eventually without popping up. And with that, I was ready to, well, move on to my other jig and do the exact same thing on the other side, because I'm making 2 of these flippin' things. But that's okay. I like doing everything twice. Once I was done with my second slat layout, I took some blue tape and I taped a perimeter around the outside of all the tambour pieces. Now you have to remember, the tambour has that tongue on the top and bottom, and you don't want the canvas extending down past that tongue, because then the canvas, which you see here, is going to ride in that groove and gum up the works. For the canvas, I just went out and bought one giant drop cloth. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. We just need some canvas, and this was a cheap way to get a lot of canvas. And next, I just cut the canvas down to size so that it was just extending onto the tape a little bit on all 4 sides. Now to glue this canvas to the tambour, you can pretty much use anything. Hide glue, wood glue. I went with Titebond 3 because it's got a little bit longer open work time, and you need a little time to get glue everywhere you need it. So, anyways, that's my story. First, I applied glue to the canvas itself, making sure that I put on a nice thick coat. Then, using a roller so that I wouldn't get any glue down in those slats, I rolled on a nice layer of glue onto the back of the tambour. Then all you got to do is lay down your canvas and use your hands to smooth it out. You just want to make sure that you get all the wrinkles out, and as you rub it, well, this thing called friction happens and starts to heat up the canvas and activate the glue, and it stays put. After doing one panel, I moved on to the next panel, gluing and rolling and gluing and laying and rubbing, and this is getting weird. Basically, it's a super simple process. You just put the glue on the canvas, put the glue on the tambour, and rub it in. Oh, we're doing this again, are we? Don't you think showing them 2 panels would be enough? I mean, I think they get the idea. You glue and you rub and you rub and you glue. Why you gotta be so creepy about it? With all of my canvas glued to the tambour slats, I decided to let it sit overnight. The next morning I came out, and because we put that tape on, it's super easy to remove. All you got to do is peel up the tape, and then using a sharp razor blade, you just slice the canvas right where the tape ends until you're left with a nice smooth seam. Now let me let you in on a little secret. If you can do it on one piece of tape, then you can do it on all the rest of the piece of tape because, well, they're exactly the same. So after cutting the tape off of all four sides, as you can see, the canvas only extends just to the edge on each side. I added a nice little bead of CA glue. This is just to help prevent the canvas from fraying. Then I could remove my plywood stop, and if all worked well, our tambour slats should be permanently adhered to that flexible piece of canvas. I just bent them around a little bit to make sure that I didn't accidentally glue any slats together, which I didn't. It all bends great. Then it's just doing the same process over and over and over again until you free all of your panels from their tape bonds. But it really is fun pulling these out because they're connected, but they're still so bendy and flexible. And in no time, I had all of my panels out of my plywood jig, and we were ready to start putting these cabinets together. The first thing we needed to do was hook our base to the bottom piece of our cabinet. Oh yeah, Z-clips. Remember, said if you were patient, you'd see how these things work. It's just a little metal clip that sets inside that groove and then gets screwed to the bottom. But it's got a little flex in it, a little bounce, a little movement. So as the wood moves, well, the base can move. Pretty smart. Then I took the plywood cabinet box and using those pocket holes, remember those? I screwed it to the base. Then using those countersunk holes at the top of the cabinet, I screwed it to the top piece. But then I immediately unscrewed it. Not because I changed my mind. We really just screwed it on there so that we could imprint those screw holes onto the top. And then I stuck those screws out just a little bit on the top so we could use those to align our top back into the correct position. Now, one of the last things I had to do was make this little tiny oak pole that would go on the front. Every cabinet door needs a handle, or else how are you going to open it? To attach this, I just used a little CA glue. And that was it. No, I'm just joking. I just used the CA glue to hold it in place just so that I had it where I wanted it. Then I took the panel back out and using a countersunk bit, I drilled holes and put in 2 screws all the way through our tambour and into that little pole so that it was held nice and secure. Then finally, the last step, I applied a nice coating of paste wax, both to the tongues on the tambour panels, as well as inside the groove on the top and bottom of the cabinet. Now it was time to assemble the entire thing for the last time. Hopefully. Knowing me, I'll see something that's wrong with this and pull the whole thing apart just for kicks and giggles, but anyways. Even without the top on, it's already starting to work like it's supposed to. Pretty darn slick. Now because we already pre-drilled the screws into the top and we left them proud on top of that cabinet piece, all we have to do is stick the top back on, align it with those screws that are sticking out, and screw it back in place. It's really that easy. I mean, even I can do it, so can't be that hard. Am I right? And hi ho, here we go. We've got one cabinet completely done. Oh farts, I forgot. Remember I said there was 2 tambour panels? Well yeah, we got to secure this other one so that it won't move around. We only want one panel moving. So I cut some of the world's smallest wedges. Call them wedges, call them shims, call them whatever you want. After applying glue to each side of the wedge shim, I put them up inside the track on the top and bottom, in between the tongue and the side of the track. They were glued securely in place, wedging that right panel so that it cannot move. Only the left one can. and it moves pretty darn smooth, if you do ask me. Then with one cabinet done, we just followed the same simple steps, and in no time we had the other one complete as well. 2 cabinets. The only change I did on the other cabinet was I switched the orientation of the door opening. These are going to go on either side of a bed, so I figured one should open one way and one should open the other way. But the most important thing is, they're done. I didn't even know what tambour was before this project, but with a little research and a little work, we got them put together. And they look pretty sexy. Can I say sexy?
Nope, still not magic. I was back there this time with you doing my hand from the back. Anyways, we did it, guys. We built 2 tambour side tables, and they're pretty sweet if you ask me. Hopefully you enjoyed that video. Hopefully you'll go out and challenge yourself with a project that's completely out of your wheelhouse. Just do it. Get it done. Remember, there are plans available for these 2 side tables. There's a link in the video description, as well as a link to every tool you saw me use throughout this video. If you're interested in any of those, make sure to check them out and click that link to my Patreon page. You can support me over there if you want to help keep the lights on around here. All right, enjoy. It just never gets old.